Okay, great. Yeah, then let's get started. Yeah, my talk is about like demonstrating Nomad's editing and data entry capabilities, which is like a new feature that we are currently adding to the Nomad platform. And the underlying question behind this is that we want to see, can we use Nomad as an ELN? Right. And what the demonstration will show is like how this could work. But of course, there's also the question is why should Nomad be an ELN? And I will have a few slides in the beginning and try to motivate this a bit. But eventually it will probably be you to choose whether this is a good idea or bad idea or whatnot. But we certainly want to explore this, and I will explain why FAIRmat thinks this is a good idea. Before I start, I have a few qualifiers to make. First of all, you see the photos of Shajir here, Mohammed, David, Pepe, and Shandor, who were all involved in developing these features that I'm trying to demonstrate now, and much of the praise also should go to them. The next qualifier is what we are showing here is under development. So this is going to be a pretty hot demo where I did the last changes just a few minutes ago and stuff like this. So I'm certainly very excited about it. I hope everything goes well. Yeah, but if you go to the Nomad website and try to find these kind of things, they're not there yet, right? We're still building them and we'll publish them shortly. But the idea also of this talk is to motivate you a little bit to see what's possible, and hopefully we can identify groups and people that are interested in actually trying this and develop this together with us. And the third qualifier, as most of you know, I'm not a physicist. In the demo, I tried to reproduce what Pepe was doing with ELN FAW, but keep in mind, I might say some stupid stuff just because I don't really know the physical details behind this. So I really want to focus on the data and the features and stuff like this. Okay, let's jump into the presentation part. So we started with Nomad, and I'm not sure if everybody of you knows what Nomad is. I assume that most of you do. Maybe a few words on Nomad itself, but it started as a web-based, yeah, kind of sharing platform, right? It's a web page that you can go to, and then you can upload your research data. And the original idea was to serve computational simulations, DFT simulations and molecular dynamics simulations, these kind of things. And here, what people usually have is they have files, right? They run simulation with certain codes that were developed by the community. And this gives us files that have like a somewhat stable format, right? And you can upload them to Nomad, and Nomad can then look into these files and extract all kinds of metadata and data from these files. And this works for like a wide variety of codes. And what Nomad is then doing is like basically translating from this specific format into a more general format, so that the data becomes more interoperable and easier to access. And we can put all the search functionality and analysis functionality and visualization capabilities and stuff like this on top. Of course, this works well when you actually have data in files, right? When you have something that produces these files. But we understand that in the experimental world and in the synthesis world, this is not always the case. Here, it's much more manual work, and you have to enter your data manually, take notes, and these kind of things. So as we now want to progress into the FAIRmat project, where the idea is much bigger, and we definitely want to go beyond computational material science and also include experiments and synthesis, this becomes important, right? But this is only one aspect. Another aspect of FAIRmat is that we really want to now cover the whole life cycle of data. It's not just about publishing data and sharing data. It's also like the early steps where you acquire the data, manage the data for yourself, work with the data in your group, and then surely analyze your data, and then at some point you want to share this with external people and publish this in papers and stuff like this. So the whole research data management becomes far more complex, and you need more features in terms of organizing your data. Another aspect is this whole workflow idea, and this is also where manual data entry comes into, right? It's not just that you need note-taking for working with your instruments and then doing processes and then characterizations. Also human workflows, right? When you interact with other people, this is also stuff that needs to get documented. And here it's not just for experiments. This is also true in the theory world, right? If you run a series of computations, for example, with a certain intent, you also want to document this, and this service also needs something where you need to be able to manually edit stuff and enter data into a system like NOMAD. Yeah, so that's, I think, is the main motivation why we think we wanted to add electronic lab notebook capabilities or editing capabilities in general, that there simply is this human component to science, and not all data comes from files or from instruments or from like computer programs. Some data really comes from humans, and we need to have some functionality to allow to enter this. What you see here in this slide is basically our development roadmap, like the stuff that we want to develop in the next half year. So the idea basically is like, we just started with the FAIRmat project, and we want to get like a kickstart, right? We want to try to implement a first iteration, like a first version of all the features that are necessary for FAIRmat in a short amount of time. And these tutorials are a little bit like our milestones that we use to demonstrate like certain steps in this development. And today we want to focus on ELNs, obviously, but there's other stuff, and some of the questions that you have or already said go in this directions. Like in later tutorials, we also want to show how this idea of a network works, right? Where you have like some parts of FAIRmat run onto central servers, other parts of FAIRmat run at local institutes. How do they communicate? How does the data sharing work in a larger context where you really want to share your data across institute and all these kinds of things? This is stuff that we want to present in the May tutorial. And then even further, when we go into the summer, we also then want to demonstrate at some point how the central system works, how you can search for data, how you can search data centrally and then access the data that is stored in different places all over the FAIRmat project, and these kind of things. But this is not what we are doing today. Like all the data sharing, searching, and these kind of things, ideas I want to keep for later tutorials. Today we want to focus on how can I use NOMAD to enter data besides uploading data in terms of files. Here's a short summary of how we think, well, what different data sources we see and how they should get into a data management platform like NOMAD. One part is already covered. That's the top layer here, right? Where we have like computer programs as a source. That can be like theory simulation codes, or it can be instruments that have typically some software that gets the data from the sensor to a file or something, or that can be automatized like workflows. Like in theory, you have these high throughput workflows, or maybe you automatized your lab to a degree where it's like producing lots of data and stuff like this. Yeah, so that's the first idea, right? You have something that already produces structured data, and these data come in file formats that can be like the output format of a simulation code, or it can be something like Nexus, for example, is pretty popular in the experimental world. So it's already structured data, and if you want to put this into NOMAD, NOMAD can already have a chance in interpreting this data through parsing, right? So there can be programs that analyze the files and use the structured data and just translate it into NOMAD's common data format. And as an end result, we get all the data in a homogeneous kind of structure, and then we can build the rest of the platform on top of this, like searching and visualization and analysis and stuff like this. So this is what NOMAD always did, right? And what it still does. And in terms of experiments, we can certainly extend it in this way, and we are doing this. Like Shando and his team is developing all these Nexus capabilities. So if you have instruments that produce data in a structured way, we then transform it into Nexus files and then get this into the NOMAD platform, and you basically get all the features and functionalities that you also had in the theory world. Now to the new stuff. The next two layers, yeah, the big one is human activity, right? You're working in the lab, you are handling your samples, you're putting them into your instruments, you make observations and stuff like this, and you want to do notes about it, right? You want to somehow capture what's happening in your laboratory. And this is basically human activity as a source for data. And what we think we want to do here is to have forms, right? We have a web page where you can enter all this information and structure it through the use of templates and forms. We will see this in the demo, what I mean with this. Yeah, but in it's basically a method to structurize whatever you have in your head. And then through the GUI, we provide the functionality for you to do this. And the end result is, again, structured data, right? Everything is after a well-defined schema. Every piece of information has a description, a definition behind it. So that we basically have the same benefits that we had from parsing files. And the last source might be other databases, other pieces of information that contain reference data, for example, or that come from a laboratory management system, or that come from collaborating in larger projects and stuff like this. What we typically see here is that the people come with tabular data, right? They have like larger CSV files or Excel files, or manage their data in other structured formats, like have database exports in JSON or XML or these kind of things. And it's what we want to do here is pretty similar to parsing, but it's much simpler, right? It's the data is already in the right structure. It just needs to be mapped to our schema, so to speak. So all the keys that you might have in a JSON file, or all the columns and that you might have in an Excel file, just have to be mapped to whatever is in the schema, and thereby we can then enter the information into the NOMAD system. And the end result is always the same, right? We want to have these structured metadata that are based on a central schema, so that for all pieces of information that you can find in them, you always have a definition behind it. You always know what the unit is and what the shape of this data is, and so on and so forth. And this is what we think makes the data eventually fair, right? Because this gives us a chance to make stuff findable by putting the information into a search interface, or make it interoperable by really having a way to interpreting the information in the right way, and so on and so forth. Yeah, that's the basic idea, why we want to extend NOMAD and how we want to extend NOMAD. And today we want to look at this form stuff, right? Eventually, ELN, at least from my perspective, means that you give people the possibility to express themselves on a web page and enter information this way. I mentioned the word schema a lot, and also the talks before, Pepe, Shajil, and also yesterday, we're always focused on this, that the information that we give needs to have context, that it needs to be well defined, it needs to be clear what we are talking about. It's not just about like providing text, it's really about providing data objects, and data objects have different properties and quantities and stuff like this, and everything needs to have a well-defined basis. For the example that Pepe showed in his talk, where this was about a sample, and then you can apply processes to the sample and then do characterization measurements based on this sample. And then you want to reference and link everything together with chemicals and the instruments that were used, and so on and so forth. You might get a picture like this. I think it's very similar to what Pepe showed. What I want to highlight here is that there might be different types of relationships between your data objects when you design a schema, or when you want to design a system that allows you to provide this data. And this is also a little bit different to, I think, what most of the ELNs are doing, at least based on what Mark was talking about yesterday. In NOMAD, we are not just having like relationships between data objects, we really have a structure within data objects. So we can really say, my sample consists of certain things, or what I do with my sample consists of certain things. And thereby creating like this parent-child relationship, creating a hierarchy of information. So for example, the sample and processes and measurements, we will see in the demo, we designed it this way, right? We say, okay, we create a sample, we create it through applying processes, and then we do the characterization. So this is like a very tight connection. A similar relationship you have when you look at the instrument data and you do maintenance on the instrument. These maintenance steps are then basically becoming part of the instrument data object as children of that. And besides this parent-child relationship, we always have like normal references where you say, okay, I do a process, and then I apply, like within this process, I use a chemical, for example. And here we designed this as a cross-reference, right? The same as like when the process is using an instrument, this is also what we designed, like with a relationship in the the database sense, so to speak. Yeah, so on top of the normal relationship that you also see in ELN FTW, we also have this idea of parent-child and having a hierarchy, a deeper hierarchy within our data objects. I hope this will become more clear when we jump into the presentation. I just wanted to give this as a primer, so to speak. Okay, maybe a last word on the underlying data model in NOMAD, and then I promise we will really jump into the demonstration. Or maybe I skip this. I think it will become much clearer in the demonstration, then we can go back to it later when we have questions. Okay, let's start with the demo. I somehow have to get out of this full screen thingy here. Okay. Yeah, so again, this is like a development version, so you won't find this yet on the actual NOMAD servers. The idea anyway behind NOMAD is that there is not just one NOMAD, right? But there's many NOMADs. We have this idea of the oasis, and in FAIRmat, the idea is that you in your laboratory, you might run your own version of NOMAD to manage your own research data. And what it looks like is something like this, right? Let me reload the page. So if you like initially open it, you get the splash screen, and then you are prompted to log in. Let me do this right quick. Yeah, then NOMAD has like different capabilities. You have these different tabs on top of this. We have the exploration capabilities, the analysis capabilities, and then documentation and about stuff. So this is not what we are going to focus on today. You can go back to the first tutorial to get more information on this. Today we want to look at this publish thing, and yeah, with the vocabulary you still see where NOMAD was coming from. Yeah, but this is where we want to enter data, where we want to manage our data, and so on and so forth. This is here the uploads page, so that's the list of all the things that I've already created. It's empty right now, so let's create an upload. And the idea with an upload is that it acts as a project, so to speak, right? It gives your data some context. For example, like the very basic thing, of course, uploads can have names. So let's say that is like our ELN tutorial. What I mean with context is, for example, you can manage the users that are allowed to access this data, or that you can collaborate with, right? So for example, I could now invite someone else. Let's say I invite Lowry, for example, as a co-author, so that he can also provide data to this upload, or as a reviewer, if let's say he's my supervisor, he only wants to see my stuff, like things like this, right? We have these collaboration capabilities, and also data protection, right? Right now, only I'm able to see what I'm doing here. And later uploads will also be the granularity that we use when we want to transfer data in the FAIRmat network and send it to other NOMAD installations and stuff like this. And then traditionally, you get the option to upload files, right? This is what NOMAD was always doing, and what it still does. I can upload data, and I prepared a little bit of contextual data that I need for the demo, and let me upload this right quick. So I select the file, let's say upload this. Then the data gets uploaded, and then the processing starts, and NOMAD is looking through all the files that I provided, and I can see that certain files get detected by NOMAD, and it's creating these database entries from them, and they are currently processed, and doing this at the same time as doing a Zoom call takes a while. Let's give it a few seconds. It's almost done. Okay, now everything is there. And what you see here now is basically all the files that NOMAD could detect, and where it could run parsers on, and so on and so forth. Like, this is the typical stuff that you know when you used NOMAD before from the theory perspective. And all the data entries that you see here, there are also files behind this, right? In NOMAD, it's always files first, and then NOMAD tries to identify some of the files. Then everything that has this NOMAD tag here is basically files that NOMAD could identify as something. We also have like this more extensive file browser view, where you can now go through the whole uploads and all the files that I just put into the system. And you can see that NOMAD can have like these directory structures. So we really like you to manage the data in the way that you want to do, or like how you are used to do it on the file system. And then the database is just the overlay on top of this. So this is all the files that I've provided. And as you see here, it's not computational materials science data. Now it's really something that looks like some that you might use in the lab. I have a folder with instruments here. And for example, I have here an entry that is about an X-ray diffraction machine, I think. At this point, it's just a file, right? And it has file context. We have a preview here. So this file is just structured data in this JSON form. But it's a file that is recognized by NOMAD. So I can also click here to see what NOMAD thinks this data is about. And then I get this structured view on it, right? All the NOMAD entries are basically looking like this. They have these sections and subsections and so on and so forth. The data section is always the most important one. And here we really see what this is about. So this is a file that contains instrument information. I have some basic metadata about the instrument, like what is the name of the instrument. I have a description that can have pictures in it and stuff like this. I linked the user manual here. So there can be PDF files associated with it. There's the certificate, I think. Paper also showed this for this instrument, right? And then this instrument has like these maintenance steps, okay, things have been done to this instrument, and then you can look who was it, when was it done, what was done, and so on and so forth. And this appears like data that's where did the file come from, right? This probably someone has entered this manually, and this is what this demo is actually about. How can we enter these type of information into the system, right? I want to register a new instrument. How can I do this, and how can I enter these information? So let's go back to the upload. So what I showed you now is like the traditional way uploading files, and then NOMAD recognizes these files. But what happens if you don't have a file and you want to create information manually? So we added the second option here, that you can create your own NOMAD entries. And in this particular version here, we basically created schemas for 3 different types of entries, chemicals and instruments, and also a sample. And the sample is what I want to use for the demo. So let's give it a name and just call it sample and create a new entry based on this type. So NOMAD jumps then creates this entry and brings me to the entry page. I have some basic metadata about the entry, like IDs and stuff like this, file names over here. And here I have the actual contents of the entry. We said we wanted to create a sample, so we get a sample overview here. And this, what I see here now, is based on the schema behind this, right? So we defined that the sample has always a sample owner. And then I can select the sample owner. Let's say it's me. It can have a sample ID. So that's very similar to what you saw on the ELN FAW site when paper was showing this, right? So I don't know. I can give this a name and so on and so forth, and can have a create date and whatnot, right? And of course, you also get the infamous like rich text fields that you can use for general note taking. But with NOMAD and FAIRmat in general, we want to stay fair. So we want to only use this manual kind of rich text things when we don't have anything in the schema yet, right? So we want to be as structured as possible. So let me not do anything here right now. Let's leave it as it is. And say, okay, that's good for now. You get a save button, right? And you can save it and so on and so forth. But this is like super simple, right? I just entered like very basic information. I want to go deeper. What can I do with my sample? And this is where we can jump into the structured data view. So that's similar to the file browser that you saw before, but now it's a browser for the structured information within your entries. So we are still in the sample entry here. You see the same information that I just entered, but now below here, I get different options. Right? And this is where the structure part really comes into play. As I showed on the slide before, we wanted to model these processes and measurements as children of my sample. So this is what you see here now. So the schema defines that samples can have processes and measurements. Let's create a process. And then I get like different options that we programmed into the schema. And this then certainly depends on your laboratory, right? So this is modeling the same lab that paper was working in, where you can do, for example, these PVD evaporations. So I create a process for this, and then I get the metadata for this particular process. First, it's very general stuff. Let's say I can, again, I can define like the operator and when this was done. Then I can also define an instrument. And this is basically the instrument that I showed before that I uploaded it and prepared beforehand. You get like the list of existing instruments, and then you can select one. The same with chemicals. So let's see, I want to put in this copper selenide in here. What else was people using? I think there was this zinc selenide and tin selenide, if I'm not mistaken. Where is it? This one. Okay, so I entered the chemicals, right? And this is the part where we basically create references. We already have data entries for instruments and chemicals. Maybe they are in the same project. Maybe they are in a different upload. Like I don't know, for the chemicals, they have a different department that is managing them, and so on and so forth. Like, but we can create these references, right? When I type anything into here, it basically makes a search, finds the respective entry, and then creates a link towards this other database entry. Yeah, so that's it's similar to what you saw in ELN FTW, but now our links are actually more qualified. It's not a general relationship between two database entries. It's really like a sample has a specific reference to chemicals, has a specific reference to instruments, and so on and so forth. I still get this rich text view. You have the same things that the paper showed. So for example, if I can find my Finder, I can drag over a picture. Where's my Finder window? There. And let's say we drop this in here. So you get the same, you get this similar thing that you saw with paper's demonstration, right? Where you have the thing, and then you can write comments for it, and so on and so forth. So yeah, but this is very generic. What you would expect for a process. Now, what is specific about this PVD thing? For example, I can enter the number of crucibles. I don't know what crucibles are, but yeah, I can enter a number here. Yeah, in the schema, we can also have like these boundaries, for example, and we can say, okay, there are only certain numbers allowed because like this machine probably can only hold 4 of them or something like this. And let's say we use 3, right? Another thing that we can do is we can link our things with files. So let me upload the file here for this one. This is like, let's say the machine that I have is producing these kind of CSV files, and I can connect them here. And now when I save this, what NOMAD is, or what we can do, what we can put into the schema is basically the idea to combine the parsing with manual data entry. So what the server is now doing when I press the save button, it's going into this file and trying to interpret the information in this file. So here I get information that is passed from the file, right? For example, this is like the substrate temperature over time. This is the chamber pressure over time. Yeah, so and these numbers that you see, right, they basically come from this CSV file. I can also have a look into the CSV file. So I get this preview here, right? It's a regular CSV file. And we basically just told the schema to interpret certain columns in the schema file and put them into these quantities here. Yeah, similar things you can do with like the reference things here. For example, the instrument that we were referencing, I can go to the instrument and then I can look at the manual and so on and so forth, and really have all the information available when I'm entering the data. Another thing that I wanted to demonstrate is I have this creates layer here. So the idea is that each process might create a layer in my thin film kind of thing. So if I press this one here and press save, that's another action that we can program into the schema, right? That we can say, okay, if someone checks this box here, then we automatically create a layer. So if I go back here to my sample, we have this layer thing here, and now there actually is a layer. That's the one that was just created by checking this box. And then I can add additional information about this layer. I don't know, let's say that was this substrate. I don't know if this makes sense. And then I have like other things in the layer schema that I can enter, or I have to enter. Like, for example, I can enter some size values here. You also see that this is like attached to a unit, and then units have meaning to NOMAD, right? So we can, like, you see how the numbers are changing when I change the unit, and so on and so forth. Yeah, and since we created this from a process, what created the layer is then also referenced here. So that's basically the process that we just had before, right? So there is the ability to create these cross references between all kinds of information, be it in other database entries or being it in the same entry. You can connect all the pieces of information that you have. Yeah, there was the other example of the hot plate annealing. Like this manual process, like you still get the same process metadata on top, and then you have like hot plate annealing specific things below. For example, like the temperature. I don't know what paper used 200 degrees, I guess, Celsius, something like this, right? So what else? Yeah, another thing that I wanted to show is like a measurement. So we can also create measurements, and we have different measurements programmed into the schema. Let's say we want to do this X-ray diffraction thing. Again, I can select my instrument. Let's like this one here, for example. I can add my comments and paste pictures in there and so on and so forth. I have information again about this, and again the demo that we can combine this with actual file parsing. This time we have a different file format that's coming out of this XRD machine, I guess. And then when I save this, also the file is uploaded, and some of the information then comes from this file, right? So you don't have to enter everything manually. It really depends on what the processes in your lab are and what files you have around, and we can really mix this approach of manual data entry with automated parsing of information. And if I go here at the intensity, I can have a look at this. Yeah, so that's the core idea. I can manually create my entries, and depending on what I have in the schema, I get all kinds of different forms to fill out the respective information. If we go now back to files, we can see this is the file, the entry that we created, right? In the end, it's just a file, and the editing that we are just using is basically just creating this file and editing this file. So if I have a look at this file, like all the information that we just entered is then in this JSON format here, right? The processes that we created, and the layer that was created, and the measurement that we did, and so on and so forth. It's all in this file. And NOMAD just provides this editor for this file, and everything is based on the underlying schema. The files that we associated and uploaded, they also show up here, like the process again, the processes we, for example, here, or the other file that we uploaded. Yeah, everything is in here. The last thing that I wanted to demonstrate is, okay, everything is file-based and we have these files now. Can I do something with my files? I want to analyze them. I want to do something on top of this. And this is where the idea comes into play, that we can run these remote tools on our data. Here I want to demonstrate this with a Python notebook. So on this notebook that I uploaded before in preparing for this demo, in this upload I have the notebook, and then on this notebook I can launch. And this is where the demo fails, unfortunately. That's too bad. Let me try this one more time. Everything was working so well so far. That's too bad. What I wanted to show you in the notebook is actually how we can read these files and how we can create new files, and then how these files will show up in the upload. I mean, that's the whole idea about these remote tools, that we can really work in our directory structure. So what NOMAD is doing, and what is pretty much different to the other ELNs, is that all the data that you provide ends up in a directory on your server, and you can really work within these directories by using these remote tools, right? So every time you launch a tool, you basically get this directory mounted into it, and NOMAD can control who has access to this directory and who not, and who does not, by using these tools. So this tool is only launched for you, so only you have access to this tool, and you only have access to the files that get mounted into this tool, and we only mount the file into this tool that you are allowed to use. And this is exactly where I currently have these technical problems. The authentication for the tool, for some reason, isn't working correctly. So let's let me try this one more time. I restarted something in the background. Hopefully it works now. If not, I have to stop and hopefully repair it and show it to you in the afternoon. So let's try if this works now. Okay, now it's looking better. Okay, I don't know why it wasn't working. Again, we are still developing this stuff, so these kind of things are to be expected, unfortunately. So, but now I see my notebook. And the idea is that the notebook now runs in the very same directory that we just saw. We wanted to demonstrate a few things in this notebook. Like the first thing, yeah, we import a few libraries that we need in the rest of the notebook and set a few parameters, so it's not super important. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to open some of our files. So we had this X-ray diffraction kind of measurement file that we uploaded. Here we simply are opening it and then use some functionality to plot it. So very basic stuff that you would do in a notebook, right? But the idea is you can actually access these files that are directly on your server. You don't have to download them and so on and so forth. So if this is like a super large file, it would still work. Another thing that we want to do here in this notebook is we can also query the database using APIs. So here we use a query on the official NOMAD to find some theory data as a reference. So we are basically looking for a similar formula like the one that we produced in our synthesis here. So we are doing a query and we are finding like 12 elements on the NOMAD server that are kind of fitting. And then we go through some of the information in these theory data. So we extract the crystals from these theory data, and then we run them in the next step here. We run them through FAIRmat to generate a diffraction pattern. Let me see. So then then we can basically put the theory diffraction pattern on top of the actual measurements that we had, and we can basically see does this fit my experiment or does it not? And then we say, okay, these structures that we found look good. We want to save them, so we can save them as ZIF files, for example. And then we do a next step where we use a simulation library to do this X-ray diffraction simulation based on the similar crystals that we identified, and then we run the simulation. And then we plot also the simulation result and interpolate this with our measurements. And we can do all these interesting things. As a last step, we save our simulation results into a Nexus file. So that's the last thing I wanted to demonstrate, that we can create Nexus files and how they look in NOMAD. So that's for the notebook. So what we did is basically we were reading files and we were creating new files. And now if I go back to NOMAD and I hit the refresh here, I can see that new files are appearing, and these are the ones that we created in the notebook. For example, we saved these ZIF files here, and then we get this nice preview from the theoretical data. We also created like this plot where we put our simulated diffraction on top of the measured one, and we also created this HD5 file here. And for HD5, we have extra tools, but we also have like this built-in preview based on H5 Web, which is quite nice, which then allows you to really have a look at the data that we created, right? And then these HD5 files themselves have a structure, and you can see, okay, what is the experiment result, what is the simulation result, and so on and so forth. This is just for the demo's sake, but you can imagine if you have like larger HD5 files that were created from microscope or other things, that this is like quite handy, that directly in the GUI you can have like a preview into the files and see what this is about. Okay, I think this is what I wanted to show. Maybe one last remark. NOMAD is very much file-based. So in the end, all your projects are basically just directory structures that contain your files. And on top of these files, we have like the idea that some of the files are special and that NOMAD recognizes them. And this is then where we have these editing capabilities for, and this is then also where we take information and put it into the search interface and so on and so forth, and allow you to do certain things. Yeah, and this directory structure has the advantage that I can simply download the whole directory, for example, if I want to share this with someone and send this to someone or whatnot. And so on and so forth, which is quite practical, right? You don't necessarily have to deal with an API just to get your data back. I guess this is what I wanted to say. Okay, let's go back to my slides for the last few minutes of the demonstration. Yeah, maybe just a last slide with a summary. So the question was, is NOMAD an ELN, or can NOMAD be an ELN? So what we basically produced is like forms that are created based on the schema that you can define. And this allows you to enter information, to link entries with each other. That allows you to combine the parsing with manual editing steps, so that you have an easy time combining different approaches and get all the data into one system, where you then can collect data, curate data, and share your data. Yeah, hopefully you stay with us, and then in later tutorials in the summer we can then really show how this whole data sharing works and how data can be shared between different instances of NOMAD and so on and so forth, the full FAIRmat vision, so to speak. Yeah, and the last point that I wanted to make, that in NOMAD everything is like kind of file based, and you can imagine working with NOMAD the same as you would work with your local computer, but on a remote system. Okay, that was it from my side. I hope I stayed somewhat in time, and I hope that there are questions from you. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Markus, for the very nice demonstration. Very good. Make it working. And actually, I would like to highlight again what Markus has said already, is that we are looking for collaborators. If any of you would like to see this system running in your lab, then we are really happy to collaborate with you, to start working with you, to help you with even designing the schema, how you can describe all the workflows and actions, what's happening in your laboratory. Please just come so we can really talk and discuss together. We will have on the same session at 4 o'clock, so you can come back to see it again. But before going there and before leaving, let's have a discussion. So if anyone has questions, please just come, raise your hand, put your affiliation next to your name so I can really call you. The first one is Roland Mines.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the presentation. I actually have a couple of questions, but maybe I start with one. Concerning the directory structure, how does it really work? Is it all based on the parent directory being associated with the sample, and then everything I do on the sample goes in subdirectories? And what if I, for example, have a process running on different samples? So yeah, that's how is the best strategy?
Yeah, so I think there are two questions in there. Let me start with the last one that I got, and this is like, how can I change the relationship between my data objects? Like if you say you don't want to have your process be a child of your sample, but you want to have it differently, right? Because you have like one process with multiple samples associated or whatnot. And this is really where the schema part comes into play. I think Mark yesterday put it in this terms that he said there are like lots of ELNs that are very common, like they have this medium voter situation where they do a little bit of everything, but he also said there are these very customizable systems, and I would say this is really where you have to put some work into customizing it first and putting the schema in a way that fits your workflow. Mm-hmm. Like if the work at your lab is different than what I showed here, then the schema has to be designed differently. And what we eventually want to do is we want to say there are these reusable schema fragments, right? You can have something like a sample, you can have something like a process, but how you arrange them is then up to you. So you have to basically provide the schema information for this. So if you want to say I have an experiment and the experiment has like 2 processes and 2 samples, then that's fine, right? You just have to create the schema in this way. In this sense, this was just one example. With the directory structure, the directory structure is just for your convenience, so that you can organize the different files that you have in the way that you like. It has not necessarily an influence on the data structure itself. The data structure is fully defined by the schema, right? And then when you fill out this, the forms, you just select files, and where they are, that's up to you. If they are in the same directory, on another directory, on a different project, that's really for you to organize. And this really then allows you to work with a larger group, right? For example, let's say you have one department that is responsible for taking care of the instrument and doing the maintenance, and another group of people is then actually doing the experiments. They can have different uploads, they can have different projects, right? You can maintain the instruments in a different, very away from, right? And say, I can only change the instrument and you can only access and read the instrument and create links across everything. Yeah, I hope that makes somewhat sense. So basically you have these 2 layers. You have the database layer and you have the directory layer. And the directory layer is just for you to organize your files. And then, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I have to I'm just thinking about I mean, this is always, I think, a compromise between being flexible but still as structured as possible. So I'm thinking of that there might be processes with different samples, but then I also have different processes on a single sample, and this is somehow probably I have to.
The way that we are envisioning this is that you have certain workflows, that you have certain types of experiments, right? And then for each of these types, you define your own schema. And then when you start a new one, you basically decide, okay, this is, I use this structure, or I use this structure. And we hope that this is good for most of the people, right? That you're not really reinventing everything completely with every experiment. I mean, if this is the case, that's also fine. You just then have to make your schema as flexible as necessary, right? You can always decide to lessen the emphasis on structure and go more into the generic way and deal more with like generic text fields and generic references. But you can, when you want, to be very specific in your schema.
Okay, thanks a lot. And then I also want, sorry, maybe, yeah, maybe just very shortly. Can I modify an instrument just for a specific process? So let's say I plug something onto the instrument, or is this then
yeah, I think this is
different from the set?
This is a way, again, how you model it in your schema, right? You could say my process is associated with an instrument, but then it gets a different child that allows me to define what modifications I did to the instrument, right? And then this only belongs to the process and leaves the instrument data object alone, so to speak. Yeah. This is really you can be very creative with the schema, and yeah.
Perfect. Thanks.
Thank you for the question. Next question comes from Marcel Carmo. You can switch on your mic and camera, please.
So, hello. Thank you for your nice presentation. I have a quick question from the first tutorial, if you don't mind. After I press the publish button and confirm my upload, you mentioned that you cannot delete anymore. What does you mean? You cannot mail, if you, for instance, if you have that zip file, you cannot delete this zip file, or what?
When you, I mean, you can delete your files on your computer, of course, but the upload that you created on NOMAD, you can't delete anymore after you published it. That's the whole idea, right? Once you publish your data and make it basically accessible to the whole world and reference it in your papers and stuff like this, you cannot remove it anymore, because it has to be there for all time and become bigger part of the human knowledge and so on and so forth.
Just to give a context actually for the rest of the, of the people in this room, is that indeed the idea is that you set up Nomad in your institute. This is called Nomad Oasis, and here you can work with your files as you want. That's what we've been just showing with your uploads. And the question was, what happens if you say that I want to share my data with the whole world. I want to publish it, make it publicly available. And in Nomad, there is a support. In this case, this entity will become publicly available, not necessarily from your Oasis, but actually from a central database, from a central Nomad database. And this was the question. If you have already published something, what can you do with this? And the idea is that as soon as you made your scientific publication, it's already there. Maybe you can make some errata, a new publication saying that I was wrong here and I would like to correct it or something like this, but the publication has already been done.
On the tutorial in May, we want to focus on this relationship between the Oasis and the central system, right? And how does the research data lifecycle work, right? What happens locally at my institute? What do I do in my project? How do I share this with my people in the same institute? How do I put this at some point in the central system? How do I make it searchable for the whole world? And this is where we have like lots of room for these kind of questions that are more in the direction of data sharing and data publication.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, thank you. Actually, we are running over time. It's not a problem. We can still have one question from Markus Scheidgen.
I just wanted to ask how to handle common data. For example, if I have a calibration file, which is valid for many experiments, will I have endless number of copies for that, or how is this handled?
Yeah, it's a little bit how I showed with the chemicals or the instruments, right? You can have this file once and then reference it from everywhere, right? That's the idea of these these references, that you don't have to repeat yourself. But the good thing.
Then I have a reference, but now I want to share this to someone.
Yeah.
In a I don't know, in a zip file or whatever. Then everything gets copied, or?
Okay, so what you're right. What you have when you have a reference is just like what we use as a URL, basically is a string in the data that then points to this data, right? And eventually the idea is that this is like good enough, right? You can use URLs, and it can be everything in these URLs. It can be a DOI if it's like a published kind of thing. It can be a reference to an external database, or it can be just a reference to something that is on Nomad. And when you share this, then one idea would be that you just share the reference, and if the target of the reference is available, then people can like get to this way. Mm-hmm. This becomes easily super complicated when you have like policies on top of this, right? Not everybody can see this, and some of my data is hidden and stuff like this, and then it becomes complicated, right? Then what does it mean to share a reference? I shared a reference, and then the person I shared this with can't really access this because he goes to this URL and then he just sees you have to log in or something like this. And this sort of problems we want to figure out in the next couple of months, and this is again where the next tutorial will be about this whole relationship about having a network of Nomad instances, and now you are sharing your data, right? You're moving it from one place to another, and how do you guarantee that you still have access to the data that is left behind, right? Or the references that you haven't copied with and stuff like this. So we certainly have ideas here, but no solutions yet, and this is what we want to work on the next couple of months, and then hopefully have better answers in May. Yeah, so right now I can only answer like different possibilities. Yeah, the original idea would be that we just share references, but this comes with problems, right? Visibility and these kind of things, or what happens if you remove the stuff that was referenced and so on and so forth. Here we just have to create the right policies and the right functionality to make sure that this is somewhat in check.
And actually, sharing URLs or sharing references inside Nomad can basically mean that there is another Nomad user, and then basically you give access rights. So that means that when this person has access right to these locations, then also the URLs are valid. So then with your being logged in, you are already able to go and find. This is a bit different scenario than when you would like to pack something and then make this as a file available to someone. Maybe here we also have some ideas how you can really get instances put together into one schema, where a schema basically covers everything. And that's what Markus said, that indeed we are working on this. And you may want to come actually next week. There will be a dedicated NFDI Nexus workshop where
I registered already.
Very perfect. So we will discuss that this further on next week.
Yeah. I mean, one
this
piece
is
of
exactly one of the topics which we wanted to discuss there as well.
Maybe a little bit more of a concrete answer. Like one thing that we have in our API, for example, is that if you want to get the structured information, the data that NOMAD has parsed or that you have entered through this ELN capabilities, we have a function that allows you to resolve the references. So you can basically say, I want to have this information and please resolve all the references in this. And this is where it would basically create a copy and pull all the reference information into the same structure, and you would just get a larger structure, and instead of references you would have copies of everything. That could be, for example, one idea.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.